In this lesson, we'll take a closer look at the materials in our scene and learn which ones should have gamma correction and which ones should not. Okay, so this is pretty much the exact same scene that we looked at in the previous lesson, but I do want to point out to you that I did go ahead and change in my color management settings my default output profile to linear sRGB, so that way we can output our 32-bit linear files. Now, to kind of go hand in hand with that, again, just as before, I switched in color management the image color profile here to also be reflecting of that linear sRGB color space, so that basically the data that's coming in, Maya can read that as linear data and then display that to me inside my render view as sRGB data, and while it's still maintaining its linear sRGB color space. Okay, fantastic. So we should be good to go, right? Wrong. No, we are not good to go because of the fact that there's some very, very important things that we need to consider when it comes to the materials in this scene. So in looking at this render, now just kind of look around and see what type of different textures and materials we might have. Obviously, we have our diffuse color maps. We have some kind of a specular map, possibly. Some kind of a transparency map, possibly, around these guys. And maybe some kind of a bump or a normal map here for the ground. So lots of different types of maps that Maya, with our current settings as they are, is going to assume that they all are sRGB. And it's going to remove that gamma encoding so that they can live in a linear sRGB color space. That is going to be a problem because not all of these maps need that, or should have that, to be 100% completely accurate. So let's go ahead and talk for just a moment about which ones of our materials should actually be gamma corrected and which ones should not. So let's start with what should be gamma corrected by Maya in this color management workflow. Which one of our maps and our basically the pieces of our materials should stay in this sRGB color space so Maya can remove that gamma encoding and switch them to linear? Well, basically that's anything that's responsible for an object's color. You break that down into a number of different things, but really we can look at diffuse color maps. Those should stay in an sRGB color space. Colored reflections or refractions, again, things that are responsible for color on an object. And colored specular highlights. These all need to basically stay in that sRGB color space so color management can switch them over to linear. Now, what should not be gamma corrected and needs to stay in a linear color space? Therefore, color management is going to basically ignore it. Well, that is basically maps that are already linear or that do not contribute to the overall color of an object. Now, that can be a number of different maps here, so let's go ahead and run through a few. So, bump maps and normal maps fit into that category. We don't want any kind of adjusted gamma on those because it's going to change the way that those maps look when we render our scene. Now, the next type of map is a displacement map. Again, we're subdividing our mesh based on the values in that map. And if we go and apply a different gamma response curve to that, then those values are going to change, and thus it's going to change our displacement result. Transparency maps, another type of map that we want to live in a linear color space. Again, the transparency result will change if we change that gamma. Specular maps fall into that same category. And lastly, really any 32-bit images that we may be using in our scene. So let's jump back to Maya and see exactly for this particular scene what that means. We'll just go ahead and close out of the render view really quickly here. And let's go ahead and bounce over to the Hypershade. Now you can see here that I have my work area hidden, but basically I'm on the Textures tab right now. You can see that there's a ton of different materials inside my scene here. Let me just go ahead and jump back to the textures really quickly here. And what I want to point out to you is, again, that we've got really a number of different types of textures here. Again, some of these contribute to the color, like these guys here. Some of these do not. Some of these are normal maps, or transparency maps or specular maps, things of that nature. So what we need to do, let's just go ahead and double click on file 1 here, and that's going to open up our attribute editor. Now what I want to point out to you here is down here under the file attributes, the color profile. Right now, by default, each one of these should be set to use default input profile. Now notice that may sound kind of familiar. It should, because if we look in our render settings, the default input profile is set under color management to sRGB. So basically what this means is if we leave the default color profile for each one of our files that we have inside of our scene set to use default input profile, each one of them, Maya's going to try and remove that gamma response curve of 2.2 and reapply a gamma response curve of 1 so that it can all live inside of a linear color space. Again, bad news for things like normal maps, transparency maps, and other things that don't contribute to color. So what do we need to do to fix this? Well, let me show you. We'll come back up here, and for the normal maps, let's just select this file 11 here. I'm going to come over to color profile, and I'm going to switch this to linear sRGB. By doing that, what that's going to do is when Maya goes to check all of the textures that are part of materials, it's going to be checking, and basically it's going to see this linear sRGB and it's going to skip it because it already is in that linear color space. So now obviously we have a lot of different textures here, so let me show you a really quick way of basically making changes to this one attribute for multiple files here. So let me come in here, and I'm going to go under the window menu, under General Editors, and we'll open up the Attributes spreadsheet. Now when that opens up, you'll see here that I have file 11 selected. That's the one over here we selected. So we'll want to click on the All tab over here on the right, and then if we scroll all the way to the right here, inside the Attributes spreadsheet, we should see Color Profile. Notice here that the current value for that file is set to 2. Remember, we set that one to linear sRGB already. Let me just shrink this down a little bit so I can get to another normal map here. Maybe this guy. This one's still set to use default input profile. So, but notice here now what the color profile value is. It's 0. So what we need to do at this point is go ahead and first select all of the files that we want to change. We can skip this one. We've already changed him. You can see that here. So I'm going to come through here. We'll click on these two. I'm going to hold Shift so I can grab them both. We'll click on these. And I'm going to continue to scroll down here. Anything that does not contribute to color. So there's a transparency map there. Looks like a transparency map there. These look like specular maps. Maybe a specular map. Missed a normal, normal, normal. So you can see there's a lot of different textures inside this scene. That's okay. I think I have them all at this point. Now, at this point, if I jump back into my attribute spreadsheet, you'll see here we've got a lot of different things selected. In fact, if I drag this out, you can see all of these files have been listed here. Now, notice the color profile for all of these guys is currently set to 0, but I can change them all just simply by clicking on this tab up at the top and just putting a value of 2 in. Just like so. And you can see here after I hit enter, it changes the value for each one of those selected files. Exactly what we needed. So at this point, what you can do to double check is you can click away from one and then come back and click on it again, and your color profile for all those selected files should now be linear sRGB. Exactly what we want it to be. Alright, great. So does that mean we are done with anything that has to do with our materials at this point? And the answer to that is still, unfortunately, no. Let me come over here and open up the render view again. So basically, we've handled all of the file textures, and we've fixed the color profile for each one of those. But another consideration that we have to take into account here inside of our materials is anything that is procedural. So let me show you an example of that. I'm going to come back over here and let's just kind of take a look at this lamp here. See how kind of a washed out color that is? It's kind of almost a khaki color. Now, if I come over and find the material for that, let's just show my work area here. And I believe it's titled lamp something, lamp base. There we go. And we'll just expose the input connections. You can see it's just a simple material. But if I come over here, this is the color that I've chosen for that material. And inside the render view, that's not the color that's rendering out. We're getting something much, much more washed out rendering out here. So now the reason for this is that in order to accurately choose this color on my screen, this is actually something that exists in an sRGB color space. If it didn't, we wouldn't be able to pick accurate colors. So anything that's procedural like this can be a color input or a color value here, a color attribute, or it could be maybe a texture of some kind. If I come over and grab my create bar, maybe a checker texture or something like that. Anything that has a color attribute like that, we need to make a change to that. So let me show you how to do that. I'm going to just clear that up and give me some little bit more room here to work. So now with this color attribute, what we need to do, we're going to go and click on that a couple of times here. And what that'll do is it'll load that color up here into my recent colors bar. At this point, we want to go ahead and plug in a file, or rather a node here. So let's click on that little checker button. And we'll come over here to our utilities. And we're going to scroll down here until we see Gamma Correct. We'll go ahead and plug that guy in, and you can see here how it bounces me right over into that node. And what we can do now for this value is we can come over and we can select that color at this point. Now at this point, really nothing is happening to it. It's the exact same color if we were to look over here. Really the exact same color as before, right? Well, that's because the gamma is currently set to 1, indicating no change. And basically what we need to do at this point is we need to input the reciprocal of that value. So kind of the magic number you want to remember is 0.45. And we're going to put that into each one of those 3 fields. Now, you may notice here my material looks darker in this case. But again, this is the color that we chose, but this is the color, if we come back over and click, you can see it here, this is that color in a linear color space. Again, it's not showing up correctly on our monitor, but this is what that color should look like in a linear color space. Fantastic. Let's jump back to our render view here and see what happens when we begin to render this out. I'm going to come over and save this image for comparison here. And let's go ahead and re-render. Now when this comes back to me, at first glance, this may look really like, well, honestly, like nothing has really changed. But let me just scrub back and forth here, because I think when I do, you'll notice a pretty significant change. This is before we made changes to the materials, and this is after. Now, it almost looks like there's even a shift in the lighting. Now, what you're seeing there, that major change in the renders, is the fact that now our normal maps, they're not being gamma corrected. So basically, we're seeing the normal maps now as they were intended, whereas this before was actually wrong. So let's go ahead and look at our little lamp here while we're at it. Remember, this was before we made that change. Again, our lamp was really, really washed out looking. And now, if we come over here, let me just scrub back. And I'll just come over here. Just get that lamp kind of on screen. Just so I can follow this connection. And now you can see the lamp color that's rendering out is the exact same color that we put into our Gamma Correct node. So this is the part that can be a little bit time consuming depending on the scene that you're working with. Coming in and plugging this Gamma Correct node into each and every color attribute that needs that gamma correction. So it is a necessary step though to make sure that you're following a proper linear workflow and all of your colors are appearing exactly as they should be appearing. All right, great. So with that said, let's go ahead and move on to our next lesson at this point. We're going to revisit our physical sun and sky in the next lesson and learn how we can use this linear workflow and still use the physical sun and sky.